This is StoryBeat, Storytellers on Storytelling, an exploration into how master storytellers and artists develop and build brilliant stories and works of art that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators of all kinds find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University in the heart of downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a rating or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. Well, my guest today, award-winning screenwriter, director, and music composer Yuval Shrem, began his career in Israel in 1995, where he worked on a wide variety of network television shows, composing original songs, scores, theme music, and theme songs, while also writing screenplays and directing. In 2002, Yuval moved to Los Angeles, where he co-founded Fable Entertainment, a Hollywood-based content and production company, and Fable Sounds, a music software company that uses his patented musical concepts and techniques to develop high-end virtual instruments for the music industry. Those virtual instruments are being used on such TV shows as Saturday Night Live, Conan, and Wow Wow Wubbzie, and movies like Despicable Me 2 and High School Musical 3, also on Broadway musicals and national tours of shows such as Jersey Boys and Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, and live concert tours of Grammy-winning artists like Alicia Keys, Barry Manilow, and the Commodores. Following the success of his recent short film as writer, director, and producer titled The Babies, which went on to win 42 awards and 7 nominations on the film festival circuit, as well as his directing the critically acclaimed theater productions of Feeling Lucky and Blue Kiss, his newest film project as screenwriter and director, Invisible Lines, will hit the film festival circuit in early 2020. So it's a terrific honor for me to welcome the exceptionally talented Yuval Shrem to StoryBeat today. Yuval, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
It's great to have you on.
Me.
Yeah. So you are clearly hugely creative in many different directions. Where did all this creativity begin? Where did it come from? Were you creative as a young boy?
Certainly, yeah. I was really born into this type of a home. But both my parents are working artists. My father's a musician, composer, arranger, conductor, music director. My mother's an actress. I grew up in that environment. I grew up in theaters and recording studios and TV studios. So it was very natural. But
so it was in your blood.
It certainly didn't come from the outside in. It was just there for me to discover quickly rather than later in life.
And were you doing creative things even as a little boy?
Absolutely, yeah. Everything I do, I studied, and I started studying very early on because it was very clear to me what I wanted to do from a very, very early age.
Right, and where did you study?
Living in Israel, initially, I started studying music when I was about 4.
Wow.
And then started studying drama with the intention of directing since I was 7 or 8.
Wow. You wanted to be a director at 7 or 8?
Yes.
That's
I really,
amazing.
around the age of 7, I figured out exactly what I wanted to do, and it hasn't really changed substantially.
And that has therefore allowed you to truly focus on all these various creative endeavors, yeah?
It has, yes.
So were you always musical at the same time? I know you came from a musical family. Were you musical at a young age as well?
Yes. I actually have music on both sides of my family, so it was inevitable. But if you're asking me now, knowing myself as much as I know myself now, I'm a director first. I'm a director who also writes music and writes screenplays and does other things, but I'm a director in my core. And the way I think, the way I operate, the way my brain works comes from that angle.
Would you say that the directing instructs all of the other parts of it, or would you say that the other parts instruct the directing?
Well, I believe the that having done a lot of different things, different fields in some ways, I find that the process is almost identical in all of them. The creative process is really consistent for me.
Well, we're definitely going to get into the different process.
I'm just trying to get to the point of answering your exact question, which is looking at other people doing these things. I recognize that I'm a director first, so I write music like a director, not like a musician.
Great. Explain to the listeners how you write music like a director. What does that mean?
This means that most musicians, including most composers, are instrumentalists first, and it comes to them from playing, from just enjoying music and different elements of the music. For me, I tend to have an idea of what effect I want to have on the audience and what kind of experience I want to create, and then I write the music that would create that.
I see. So in other words, the context of what it is that you're writing, you are thinking about it from a how does it impact the audience perspective? Is that an accurate way to say it?
Somewhat, yeah. It's like designing the experience of the audience similarly to what you would do as a director. You're taking them on a ride that you planned.
Sure, and so you're thinking. I'm still trying to get this in my head because this is the first time I've ever heard anyone in all my years explain it this way, which is really quite interesting. That you think as a director as you're composing. So you're trying to direct how the audience is perceiving things in musically, that is?
Experiencing things, yeah. How they perceive it, it's really up to them, but at least I try to, let's say, if it's a musical theater song, by the way, minutes before we started talking, I just finished a third out of 9 songs that I'm composing for a new musical that is being rehearsed right now for workshop.
Very nice.
By the way, I was approached to do it a week ago.
And you've already written 3 songs of 9.
Yeah, the third of which is being rehearsed, I think, in an hour. So.
Wow, you're a fast writer then, yes?
That's another thing I think we can bring up, which again I thinking a little bit about my process before we started our conversation. I realized something really cool, and that's true for all aspects of creative process for me, not just in music or something else. The initial thing, the initial big picture stuff, be it a story, a dramatic concept, a melody, usually comes to me incredibly fast.
Wow.
Depending on complexity, it could be a few seconds to the longest would be a few hours to come up with the whole big picture. Be it the story concept, the dramatic concept, the melody of a song, the big picture stuff, very quick. Then there's refinement, and then that could take a very long time sometimes, or a very short time. But the refinement is where you find detail and you fill it in, and you find ways to make it even more precise and more effective, etc. If that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. I've taught for quite some time that the actual art of writing, and it doesn't matter what you're writing, whether it's music or words or whatever, the art of writing really is in rewriting. So that's what you're talking about, is that revision process, the refinement.
Yes, but I also value that initial instinct, initial intuition that started this whole thing, that is really the foundation of everything.
There's no question you need that foundation, don't you? You need that start. Otherwise, what do you have?
That's why I'm saying that's the big picture. That's the what people call the vision. And the vision needs to be super clear before you can start refining.
And you see
otherwise the refining is just changing things instead of really refining.
Right. So in other words, I imagine that when you conceive of things, which happen, as you say, happens fairly quickly, that you're envisioning things. You have a vision about something. Is that right?
I have to understand what the vision was before I can start refining. Is what I'm saying. So the initial idea is usually pure intuition. It just comes to me.
Right.
It's just there.
So many.
It is just there.
Many creative people say that whatever they're creating comes through them, or they're a conduit for it, and it comes from somewhere else. Do you feel that?
I'm trying not to overthink that part of the process because it would kill it.
I think that's good.
It's intuition. Intuition often feels like something that comes from somewhere else, but studying the brain, something that fascinated me for many, many years, what I understand is intuition is really the output coming out of the unconscious portion of the brain, because there's a very small bandwidth, very narrow bandwidth of what you can be conscious of. Our brain works on a very small voltage, about 15 volts or something. So it's not really enough to be aware of everything all the time.
Right, sure.
But in the back of your mind, literally, things are being computed and figured out. Once that conclusion comes out, it comes out as intuition.
Does it work? Does it work the same way for you with everything, whether it's thinking about a screenplay or about to stage a show or music? Is it the same kind of thing?
Yes, absolutely.
I see. So, but do you think in pictures? Are you a picture person in your head?
It's an interesting question. I guess I think in different things. I don't know. If it's music, I don't necessarily think in picture.
Right.
But it depends on it's not consistent there.
Yeah, music is more, I think, you tell me if how you do it, but music for me is more emotional and as you say, intuitive, whereas words for me anyway are more intellectual.
Once you know the craft of something, and I am of the school that it is actually really important to know your craft. It gives you tools to fulfill your idea far, far better than if you don't. There isn't much of a difference. It's like talking different languages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And for example, when I write a melody, I literally write it on paper.
Right.
I don't play it before I write it.
Oh, really? You write out you notate it before you play it.
Yes, because in the process of translating that melodic idea to playing, I might change something unintentionally. It will get altered just by the mechanical process of playing it.
Wow, that's interesting. I don't think I've ever heard of anybody that does it that way. I think that's fairly unique. Or do you know others that work that way?
No, I definitely know others that work that way.
Interesting.
Most people who notate in general, they don't necessarily have to play things in advance. They just do it.
Well, we know Beethoven, certainly toward the end of his life when he was going deaf, did that.
Well, my dad writes scores. Recently he switched to notation programs, but until a few years ago he would just write with a pen on huge papers. And the TV could be playing in the background. There could be another music playing in the background. It doesn't matter to him at all.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Are you able to do that too with other things playing?
Well, I try not to have something playing in the background when I'm trying to work.
I don't know how you do that.
But yes, I can. A lot of songs that came out on TV and one of my musicals that I wrote in the middle of the street on a bus, walking. It's like I would just find a piece of paper and write it. Interesting.
So, of course, inspiration doesn't take a break. Inspiration comes when it comes. And it is good to be able to have something around you to take advantage of it, right? Like something to write on.
I am willing to challenge that too.
How so? How does that work?
So inspiration does come when it comes, but when you do television, and I've done a lot of television back in Israel.
Yes.
You can't really afford waiting for it to come.
Well, 100% true. I mean, I've got 90 teleplay credits myself, so I get that. I get the deadline issue. And yes, I think there's nothing that focuses the mind better than a good deadline. And you have to sort of make your way to it. But I do think that inspiration, when it hits when it feels like.
Sure. For sure. And it does hit sometimes, and you definitely want to capture it.
Yeah.
And recently, and I'm talking just recently, the last 2-3 years, maybe 4, I started, if inspiration hits me and I don't have anything to write onto, I would record myself onto the phone with Evernote. And then when I'm ready to notate it, I would listen, and I might already refine it. I might have the first level of refinement when notating it, but at least I have that initial idea recorded.
And before,
if that makes sense.
I mean, before we had cell phones, people walked around with little mini recorders or with a notepad or whatever. And so people have always found a way to kind of record what they're thinking, but the phone has made it very convenient, has it not?
Absolutely.
Yeah, good.
And for screenplays and dramatic ideas, even directing ideas, if I'm in the middle of rehearsals or in the middle of shoot, I would write them also in Evernote. I like Evernote because it syncs with my computers. I can just keep going on the same document.
Right, sure.
But yeah, I definitely use the phone as a notepad, be it audio or text or otherwise, to record ideas as they come. Because there's otherwise, a lot of great ideas get lost.
Absolutely. There's nothing more frustrating than having an idea and having nothing to write it on or talk to, and then, several hours later you can't remember exactly what it was. That's very frustrating. So it's good to have some kind of recording device, whatever that is, around you. Tell us a little bit. I'm very fascinated about Fable Sounds. Tell us what that is and how that came about.
So it has a pretty funny origin story. I was doing television in Israel, and I lived through the change from always having the budget and time to use live musicians and going to a proper recording studio, to budgets shrinking to the point where it's just not feasible anymore.
Right.
And I was hired to do original songs for a show for children. It's like a musical theater type. There's always original songs in each episode. And going into the second season, I realized I was going to need saxophone sounds, and there were no saxophone sounds available that didn't sound horrible.
You're talking about in synthesizers, right?
Sampling, yeah, but basically anything virtual, basically,
right.
That would not require me to schedule a player, scoring it, getting a studio. When there really no time. You've done a lot of television, so
Yeah.
Television often, most of the time, the script is only approved days before it's shot.
Right.
Just 2-3 days before it shoots.
Correct.
And when the songs are part of the screenplay and you're waiting for the script to be approved before you start working on the songs, and they need something to lip sync to when they shoot, that doesn't leave you very long.
No. You got to move. You got to go fast.
That was the process. And fortunately, at least I was able to do the orchestrations afterwards, and they would replace the temp track with a final orchestration and mix in the final stage of editing. But that was kind of the process there. Anyway, I realized I didn't have what I needed to make it sound good, and decided to just ask my go-to, session player, saxophone player that I usually hired for recordings, to just do me a favor and sample him. And we sampled him, very basic session. It was maybe 2 hours for both his saxophones, so very quick. And I used it. Flash forward to, I think it was 2003. And I was here, and I was working on a film, and wanted to collaborate with this composer in Europe. And he told me that he was involved in sample libraries. And I was surprised. And in a part of the conversation, I told him about that sampling session and sent him a song I used it on. And for an entire year, he tried to convince me to consider to release something like that to the market because it sounds so good. And I said, no, it's not a product, and I'm not interested in making products. I'm an artist, and I had a lot of resistance to this. But eventually, his persistence and change of circumstance, I decided to consider it and spoke to that saxophone player that originally collaborated with me. And when he reminded me that he was not only a saxophone player but also a software engineer, then the deal was sealed. It was inevitable to just do this project, and and that's how Fable Sounds was created.
So you have, what do you call them? Are they patches? Are they what do you refer to these various? Are they just samplings? What do you call it?
It's a combination of audio samples and software. So we call them virtual instruments.
Virtual instruments.
Basically, you can play these instruments on your keyboard with a computer, and it will sound like the instrument we recorded, be it a saxophone, a trombone, a trumpet, a clarinet, rhythm section instruments, like, different things. But we used our own methods that, frankly, I thought about them prior. Back in Israel, I would say. I was fantasizing about a sample library that would be able to do these things. So in a way, it was created in my mind long before the idea of actually bringing it to fruition came up.
Well, I listened to a number of the different instruments on the internet and was absolutely floored at how, that you can't tell the difference. I couldn't tell the difference between a real instrument and something that is clearly electronically, generated. It's amazing. It's an amazing accomplishment that you've done there.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I can tell you that when I listen to things that could potentially be something that used it, I almost never confuse between this library and another library, but I sometimes would confuse between this and the real thing.
Yeah, I could see that.
It's just closer to the real thing than to anything else.
So let me ask you a question. How do musicians feel about that? Does it upset them, or are they okay with it? How does it work?
I think they're fine because you use this kind of product not when you could have used live musicians, but when it was not possible.
Right.
And initially, we actually tried to design it so that it would not encourage productions to replace musicians in a situation like on Broadway or stuff like that.
Right.
Now we don't bother anymore because we understand the process, and the process is if they can afford the musicians, they will use them.
Sure.
And when they can't, Jersey Boys went on tour. They can't have the full size of the orchestra there because it would not physically fit the pits in the different locations.
Right.
So that's why they do that way. And there's they have their own process, and you have to let them make their own choices. But we definitely don't want to encourage people to not use live musicians when it's feasible and appropriate. But when it's impossible, at least we're giving a tool that is really good, as opposed to what was available before.
On a show like a Jersey Boys, is it multiple keyboard players then, or is it one keyboard player, or does it take many different keyboardists?
So Jersey Boys specifically, they have 3 keyboardists on the show, and all of them have Broadway lights, which is one of the instruments.
Right.
And I don't know exactly how they use it in practice, but that's what they told me. So that's the extent I know.
I just think I truly was floored because I've heard lots of synthesizer instruments in the past, and sometimes they're pretty good, but most of the time it's obvious that it's not a live musician. This stuff sounds really live. So congratulations to you on that. I think that's a very big deal.
I realized at some point, a lot of developers of sample libraries, we meet every year at the NAMM show for dinner. for all of the competing companies kind of come together to sit together.
Right.
And in conversation one time, it occurred to me what made the difference for Fable Sounds. And the biggest difference was, again, me thinking as a director. Let me explain. It's a concept. It's a conceptual the difference, really.
Right.
What is creating a sample library? It's creating a bunch of slices. In Broadway Big Band, we have more than 140,000 separate recordings there.
Wow.
So you have a bunch of little bits and pieces that, when put together, playing on a virtual instrument, a sample library, is really just editing in real time. You're playing back existing recordings. So when edited together, create the illusion of a continuous, coherent performance. Does that sound familiar? That's exactly what a film director does.
That's true.
You generate the bits and pieces that, when put together in editing, would generate the illusion of a continuous, coherent performance.
That's true. That's 100% true. Very interesting. That's
and so
very
in recordings, my thought process and the way I worked with the musicians was similar to how I would work with actors on a film set.
Interesting. So
I know what I need for the edit to work, and then I work with that, and I know what I would need from the performance to feel fresh and expressive when it's in context.
All right, so let's use that as a jumping off point into your writing and directing process. When you're working on a new script, and you have, I take it that most of the time, your concept, as you say, comes to you fairly quickly, and then it takes a long time to develop it out totally. Do you usually have the whole story worked out before you begin writing a script, or do you just dig in?
I tend to build an outline first. It is, when I was talking about that fast process, usually I would have a rough version of that outline on day one.
Wow. That's fast.
Yeah. And then I can refine it. I can add to it. I can, that happens later. But I have a pretty good idea of the big picture almost immediately.
Is that for feature lengths as well? For a feature length idea?
As well.
Well. That's fast. Most people can maybe conceive of a. I know I can't work that fast. I can conceive of a basic story that fast, but not an outline. That takes me more time.
Well, it would be a rough outline. It wouldn't be the full outline. The full outline obviously could take longer, and it also depends on the project heavily. A good example of when it worked very differently.
Right.
Is a screenplay that we haven't produced yet, but my intention was to write a short film there.
Right.
The result was the longest script I've ever been involved in writing. But the reason was the germ of an idea, the initial big picture idea, was a dramatic concept, not a story.
Okay.
And I was trying to explore the best way to express that dramatic concept through a story. And the first choice was between contemporary crime drama or a period war epic.
Well, those are slightly different areas.
But they both served the same dramatic concept.
In what way? Explain that.
The idea was to drive the story through a strong suspicion of betrayal.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly you could have betrayal in either world, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I wanted heightened stakes. In crime drama, there's heightened stakes, and in war, there are heightened stakes.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
When I said period and not contemporary was because suspicion was the dramatic engine of the story.
Yeah.
It wouldn't really work well in current time. And that's ultimately why we ended up developing as a period piece, because you don't have cell phones and you don't have TV and you don't have radio.
Yeah.
And there really isn't a way to verify your suspicions. No easy way, anyway. And
communication is very different.
Yeah, and it keeps both the audience and the characters more on edge and more, uncertain. Mm-hmm. And it just served the story better.
It enables suspense really well.
Especially when it's a suspicion, because right now, if you suspect something, you can probably verify it very quickly.
That's true.
The tools are there. But that particular project, it's a suspense thriller set on the British side of the American Revolutionary War, mm-hmm. spanning 3 months in the summer of 1777. So it's in the middle of the war. It's not about the war, but it's in that war.
So it's after the Constitution. Well, after the Declaration of Independence, a year after that.
Yes. So it's in the middle of the war, and it's sold from the British side, and really we wanted to find the portion where they felt like they were winning, and then suddenly everything changed. And that drives the suspicions.
Does deciding to do a period piece like that, which is now going to be driven by costumes and settings and things of that nature, does that influence the way that you create the story?
Yes, because what we ended up doing, we wrote it, I co-wrote it, and we wrote it in a way that was very, very cost-conscious. And it ended up being actually a fairly inexpensive film to produce.
How did you do that? What did you do?
The vast majority of costumes are uniforms.
Okay.
We do have access to the original, so duplicating that, is a fairly easy task. And then the majority of locations are either in the woods or in tents. There's literally one set to build, and it's of a barn.
Wow.
The interior of a barn.
Is that something you can also find, or do you have to build it?
I found one or two, but the scene that happens in that barn is so long and important that I want to shoot it on a stage, just so that audio is not an issue, lighting is not an issue. Mm-hmm. I want to have better control of lighting, and there's a ton of dialogue there. I don't want the sound to be, inconsistent. And when you have it's a 40-minute scene.
40 minutes inside of one place.
Yeah.
You're very brave. That's a long scene. I assume that the it's got to be very much like a play. It's got to have crackling dialogue. Yeah.
It does. I wouldn't say it's like a play. I don't think watching that scene on stage would be effective. It is very cinematic. That scene originally was supposed to be the film. So that idea started like a minute before that scene starts. But as we were figuring out how to write the script, we started to realize, okay, this is really heightened, and it's impossible for an audience to buy into this high-stake situation so quickly. You need to introduce the characters so that people actually care about them. Otherwise, it's just over the top. And we started adding stuff backwards, just to earn that scene. Mm-hmm. And as we were adding more and more stuff backwards, we got to the actual outline that we wrote the script based on. The first draft was 100 pages, and it sucked. It was really bad.
That's what we call a first draft for sure.
No, it was going through the motions of the outline, yeah, without mining any gold. It was really terrible.
So
But
when we teach screenwriting, we talk about shitty first drafts and vomit drafts and purge drafts, and we use all those terms.
yeah. But surprisingly, once you put that first draft on paper or computer, a lot of it can stay and it will still work once you add the missing ingredients.
Of course, yeah, that's the beauty part, is that you can keep molding and shaping that scene and find ways to make subtextual dialogue and all the rest of it.
So in this case, it was mining gold. We literally needed to mine the dramatic gold because it was just not in that draft.
How long did it take you to do that?
About over 2 years.
Oh, 2 years! Wow.
And the way we worked was Corey Skaggs, who was the other writer on this project,
yeah,
was far better equipped than me to write the dialogue for this, because not only is he an American, but he lived in England for a while and was an actor on the West End, etc. So he understands both cultures pretty well.
Right.
And he was able to make that magic of creating a language that sounds period, but is still very easy to connect to for a contemporary audience, which was certainly something to search and find.
Mm-hmm.
So he wrote the first draft based on the outline we came to after a while, and then that first draft took a long time, and I was just waiting. And then once we had that first draft, because the story was written backwards in the outline, we decided to rewrite it backwards as well. So we took sections of between 20 and 40 pages each and worked on those daily. So each day there was a new version of that section.
Interesting.
So he would send me a version, I would fill it with notes and edits, send it back to him. The next day he would send me a new version, and I would read it. And once we felt like, okay, we're happy with this section, then we moved to the section right before it.
So you were literally working one scene, then coming backwards in the script, not going forwards.
Not a scene. We would take long sequences. So, usually about between 20 and 40 pages each.
Mm-hmm. And you were revising 20 to 40 pages every day for a while.
Every day, yeah, until we got to the beginning again.
Were you always, as you were writing this and creating it, were you always thinking about how you would direct it? Was that part of the process?
Yes, and most of the characters were written with specific actors in mind as well. And then from the second draft, we started having readings for drafts. Mm-hmm. So it was more easy to see what was working and what still needed work. The first draft that really worked was much longer.
Right.
I think it was 140 pages.
That's a long script.
The current version of the script that worked even better is even longer than that. It's about 160.
And you're getting ready to go into production on this, or you already completed production?
No, we have not produced it yet. And I suspect that it will not be my next film, but maybe, one or two after.
Right.
Just because in spite of the cost-cutting choices in the writing, it still is a big film, mm-hmm. and not an easy sell on producers or funding. And so I will probably want to establish myself with other films first, and then go to this.
Got it. You want to build your way up to it reputationally, yes?
Yes.
That's a very good way to go, because if you try to come out of the gate with a great big movie, sometimes that can work against you because all the elements are pushing against what they perceive as someone with less experience than they would like. So that's a good way to go, I would say. Have you already started to prep for shooting? Have you already started to work your, what pre-production would be, or are you just letting that go till later?
I think I figured out what's the correct path to get it funded, and that's another reason why I'm waiting with it. Mm-hmm. I find that every film has its own path to come to the world. And
sure.
No two projects are the same, and you just have to figure out what's the path that's going to make it happen. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm also curious about the collaboration process you went through. You were handing stuff back and forth, and you worked for a long time on it. What for you makes a good collaboration work? What do you need to do in a collaboration to make them work?
You need to collaborate with the right person, first of all.
like
right
a marriage.
For you, yeah, kind of. You need somebody who completes you, somebody whose strengths mirror your weaknesses.
Yeah, that's helpful.
And that's probably the most critical part.
Is finding someone who complements
you. You need to be a good collaborator. As a director, that's all you do, really. I mean, what is directing? The directing happens in the air between people.
Sure.
It's the collaboration itself.
Absolutely. Good directors are great collaborators. There's no question. You know, they're the I guess the individual that really oversees the total vision. That's necessary, but you can't do it by yourself unless you're making one stop motion movie and you're the only person doing it. You know, and that's very rare. So yeah.
You know, in film, you tend to have that option to be the one who with the vision. There are certainly cases where the vision is not coming from you. Television is one of them.
Yes.
But it's not the only one.
Certainly.
And that's why part of the point of being a professional director is understanding each of the processes as a separate process.
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not the vision is yours, to be able to communicate it and to bring it into life through collaboration with other people is the craft. And the art in some ways, because it's not just technique. It's a lot of it is intuition. A lot of it is feeling the energies from the other person, recognizing their process and supporting it and guiding it.
Certainly, the art and the craft are two different but related things. But you can't have one without the other. They are also collaborative, the art and the craft.
Absolutely.
Got to have them joined together in some beautiful way. Is it the same?
I find that one guides the other, one informs the other, and if it doesn't happen, then you have not achieved the optimized version of what you're working on.
I think that's true.
A lot of people stop at inspiration, and they came up with a melody and they like it, and that's it. I find that when you have the craft, when you understand how you guide a melody and how you use harmony to interpret it,
mm-hmm.
and sometimes rhythm and other things, when you know the tools, you can use them to be a lot more effective
mm-hmm.
in what you communicate.
A
few of the songs of this musical I'm composing songs for right now, I found that because of the content, because the characters are in a constant state of yearning to get somewhere and aren't able to,
right.
or believe they're unable to, that harmonically and melodically, nothing is resolved until literally the last note of the song.
Interesting.
It keeps searching for a resolution, not finding it. And then finally, I actually suggested some changes in the lyric to allow me to get to that final resolution there so that the song can actually end in an effective way.
Mm-hmm.
But literally the last note is the first time that there is any musical resolution in the song.
Well, it
doesn't happen often, but for these songs it was just the tool that I needed to make the drama work.
That's you're keeping the audience, the listener, in suspense, which is exactly what you should be doing. You want
it's I don't know if it's suspense. It's suspense and relief. I'm not giving the harmonic relief and the melodic relief
until
before it was earned.
Right. Sure. That's a form of catharsis, is it not?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And if you use up your catharsis too early, then it's not a catharsis anymore.
Yeah, that's correct. Catharsis has to be that emotional release at the end. It can't come in the beginning because you have no chance to get to it. So yeah, that's great that you can hold that out to the very end. Do you prefer to write songs or pieces of music, or does it not matter to you? Are they all the same?
They're not the same. They're different.
Do you have a preference?
Recently, I enjoy songs more. In the past, I think it was the other way around. And I suspect it will keep changing back and forth.
Do you write lyrics as well?
I only, in more recent years, started to write some lyrics as well.
Mm-hmm.
I did not consider myself lyricist, and so did not allow myself to try to do it because I have very good training about everything else I do. I didn't feel like I was equipped to do it well enough.
Right.
But after many, many years of doing, collaborating with people who are really at the top of their game,
yeah,
I think I learned something. So
I would assume you would.
I started to do it myself as well.
And all right, so when you compose again songs or pieces of music. You tend to notate it before you sit down and play. Do you play piano or guitar? What do you compose on?
I compose on paper.
But I'm saying when you then play it and refine it.
I play keyboard. I wouldn't consider myself a keyboardist. I do play keyboard. It's just a work tool.
Yeah.
Literally, when I was 4, I told my parents I wanted to be a writer, director, and a composer.
Yeah.
And at the time, there were a few other things. Obviously, the list was a little bit longer, but ironically, I ended up actually doing all of them professionally.
Yeah, sure.
But even then, I was not interested in playing the piano. I had no interest. And my parents told me, but if you want to write music, learning to play the piano is going to be instrumental and will help you with it. So I said, okay, then I'll learn it. And then I studied acting, not because I wanted to be an actor, but because I wanted to be a better director.
Yeah, that's great. That's a good way to go. To become a great director, I think you better understand how actors work. And so I think the only way you really understand it is to be a bit of an actor.
Sure, and you also understand a little bit of what they're going through, which is really, really important.
I agree.
But again, my sensibilities are different. I have a lot of my friends are actors, and we're not the same type of people. We're just not.
Yeah.
There are different sensibilities, different personality type.
What would you say are the main differences? What would you point out as serious differences?
I'm not sure I have the words to define it, but just like I was saying before, that even when I write music, I do it as a director because that's my personality.
Yeah, yeah.
I can act. I have acted, but I'm not an actor by character. Like that's not the person I am.
I think a really good actor is in the moment during a scene, and they're playing sort of from the inside out. And I think a director has to be a little more outside in and be able to step back and see the bigger picture. The actor does not have to see the bigger picture. They only have to see the moment. But the director has to see the bigger picture. Do you think that's true?
I think it's sometimes true. I think it's oversimplification of things.
Okay.
I think every actor is different. And some actors work from the outside in, and they're fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And some actors work from the inside out. I think, as with everything, combining both the inside out and the outside in is the right way to go.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as a director, you have the idea of the outside in, but when you give notes to an actor, it better be from the inside out. You have to think that way.
True. But you at the same
I would almost never give you a note that is regarding your final result. It would always be about the process.
Yeah. But absolutely right. You would never give the actor the final result because they got to get their way to it. But the
again, it depends on the actor. That's the funny thing. I found that with some people, the physicality gets them there, and sometimes as a result, my note would be a blocking note. Not because I need that blocking, but because I have a feeling that it would help the actor get there. So it's really, directing is really figuring out what type of interaction would lead people in the direction you're trying to get them to go.
Do you find it's the same on stage as it is in film, or are there differences?
The techniques are very different. So my directing techniques, the toolbox that I have is very different, but the process itself is identical.
Can you describe for the listeners what some of the different techniques are?
Absolutely. In film, I don't have to worry about it being repeatable. I need to get to the result once while the camera is rolling, maybe twice for matching angles. But it doesn't need to last. It doesn't need to be repeatable at all, because there's no need. It just needs to be captured once.
Right.
And also, I have a lot of other tools in my toolbox, be it lighting. Well, lighting I have in theater too, but framing and lenses and a lot of sound. And there's a lot of things that I can use to make a scene work. Whereas on stage, I need to make the actors on stage work. Now, when I would cut to a close-up or generate a close-up in film, I would still create that shot on stage by blocking, and that's completely possible if you think that way. But it's just a different toolbox, because on stage it needs to be repeatable. So you can't rely on getting to something in the moment. I can work with an actor to get to a moment on set, and we'll capture it and we have it and we move on. On stage, I'm not going to be there. The audience is going to be there, and the actor is on their own. That means that in rehearsal, we need to find ways for the actors to get there repeatedly and reliably every single time. So it's just a different toolbox of what, what's available for you to use.
Mm-hmm. So I would say a pretty fair amount of directing is solving one problem or another, different kinds of problems, and overcoming things through one kind of compensation, or things that you get to a set and things aren't the way you thought they were going to be, so you have to adjust. What would you say are the bigger challenges of being a director among those things? What's the most challenging thing for a director to go through?
People's egos are the hardest thing to navigate, and you get really good at it when you have to deal with it all the time.
Sure. In show business, you're trying to convince me there are egos in show business?
Well, here's the funny thing. Egos are necessary.
Sure.
In this field.
Absolutely.
They are absolutely necessary.
Definitely.
And you have nothing without them. I find repeatedly, not always, but often, that singers who are A-list singers,
mm-hmm.
and I did get to work with some of those a few times. A lot of them are really unpleasant people.
Well, I will not ask you to name names then.
No, I will not name names.
No, and you shouldn't.
But that's not really the point. The point is, if they were people who are really nice to be around,
mm-hmm.
And again, some of them are. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not including everybody.
I understand.
Some of those huge stars, I'm talking about really iconic people, didn't get there by being really nice and understanding.
Nope. They push a lot of things out of the way, and sometimes they step on toes when they do it, and they don't necessarily mean to, but they do anyway.
But they do it because of an urgent need.
Yeah, sure.
They have a very, very burning need for, audience approval and love and admiration. They do. They just do. That's their personality. That's how it developed. And frankly, it's not a fun life. I don't think it's a very fun life to feel that way. But it is how they are. Yeah. And without that, they will not become stars.
I think that there are a lot of very successful and famous people who are very shy in the real world. And the way that they compensate for that is they sometimes have to have an outer shell, and that outer shell can be a little bit off-putting to other people. And they're constantly fighting that. I've known any number of famous people who were actually quite shy, and the only way that they could sort of do what they do is compensate for it. And so that comes out in all kinds of funny ways. It comes out as ego, it comes out as condescension, it comes out as other things. And if you get them in private, one-on-one, they're nothing like that at all. But that's how their public persona is, so that's the reputation they get. It's a very interesting
I'm talking about the opposite situation. I'm talking about people whom the public persona is wonderful. And then you get to work with them, and you're like, oh my God.
That's a jerk. That person's a jerk. Yeah, well, that's true too.
And what I find, and that actually connects back to creative process in a very interesting way, I find that what we perceive as ego, and this kind of behavior as well, stems from one thing, and it's insecurities.
Yep, absolutely right. Fear and insecurity, and then they layer on some kind of superiority on top of that, and then you got a problem.
Well, sometimes even if they don't, you've got a problem, because to collaborate creatively, you need somebody to be very comfortable and feel safe.
Well, you need that. You need someone that has a good sense of their abilities and talents, and that has enough of an ego to do a great job with it. But you don't want them to be totally impossible to work with.
They need to have enough security of themselves to collaborate and take notes.
Sure.
And notes is something that I think is really important to touch on, because I think a lot of people, that's their weak point, because when they hear notes, they freak out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, notes are a gift. Thoughtful notes are a gift.
They are. One of the things that I teach my students regularly is the way to take notes. And the way to take notes is to accept all of it and deny nothing, and then take from it that which works and reject all the rest. But you don't deny it.
I want to add to it.
Mm-hmm.
I agree, but I want to add something.
Sure.
If you don't mind.
Not at all.
So if we look at notes as a gift, it's a gift that's often met with a strong resistance.
Yes.
And that's true both when you give notes and when you receive them.
Yeah.
And
sure.
That's just natural. You worked on something, you're proud of it, and now people are, quote unquote, cheating on it. In your mind. But they really aren't. They're just trying to give you feedback.
Right. Exactly.
And the most important thing is to understand that these notes, they're only for your eyes. They're not a threat. They're not threatening anything. They're not destroying anything. By you hearing notes, it's not going to destroy what you worked on.
Well, people think people sometimes interpret them as you don't like me or you don't like what I'm doing, as opposed to I'm trying to help you get to a different place, right?
Realistically, nobody would spend their time giving you notes if they didn't like you or didn't want to help you.
Exactly. But that's the
they
problem.
Would just ignore you. They have other things to do with their lives.
That's for sure. But people
to get somebody to actually read your script is such a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
If they read your script and they're giving you notes, this is amazing.
It is amazing.
And the thing is, instead of looking at it as a threat to the work you've done, you really should consider it as opportunities to see what's in your blind spot.
That's a very, very sound piece of advice for sure.
And the thing is, then you go back to what you said. When I talk about the blind spot, I'm not just specifically each note usually has two parts. Whether it's structured that way or not, it has two parts. One is recognizing the problem, and the second is usually a suggestion to how to address that problem.
Mm-hmm.
And while the solution is often wrong, almost always, the problem that's been located is real. It might not be diagnosed correctly, but it's touching on something there that's not working.
Right.
And when the solution doesn't make any sense, usually the problem was misdiagnosed, but there was a problem there. And a lot of the times the problem there is lack of clarity.
Interesting. Yes, it is. That's right. It's lack of clarity. That's very good.
Usually when the notes don't make sense, it's because somebody didn't get it. And if they didn't get it, that means that there was something related to that moment that they're noting about that isn't clear enough. And then that's a hugely valuable note that way. And then if you're smart, you take the note and you try to diagnose it yourself and understand what caused that unreasonable note to come up. Because they don't come out of nothing. They're coming out of something that's not working.
Right. And that's true as much for writers writing a screenplay with notes as it is for actors on a set with notes.
For everything.
Yeah.
For anything creative.
Yeah, that's right.
And then there's the part where you're talking about, it was like, keep what works. But I would be even more specific. Because it's not just what works, but what fits to the vision. So remember we talked about the initial germ of an idea, the initial thing, the initial core that everything is built upon.
Yeah.
It's very, very critical to really have a clear image of what that is. And then notes that fit that image, notes that support ideas that support, even if it's not from outside, if it's your own ideas that support that theme, that idea, that basic core of what you're trying to achieve here. Keep it. And if it's a great idea that doesn't belong, cut it out. Because it doesn't belong. It's going to weaken the overall impact of the piece.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's part of that whole collaborative process to try and get to the best result by everybody putting their best, concepts for and talents.
What I said now, by the way, it applies to even a performer singing a song.
Sure.
They might have a really cool ad-lib idea, and just because they did it, the whole carefully constructed song suddenly doesn't work because it's not believable anymore.
Well, wasn't it Faulkner who once famously said you have to be willing to kill your darlings? So sometimes you come up with this little cute concept in the middle of whatever it is, whether you're writing a script or singing a song or whatever, and it doesn't fit in. It doesn't work with the whole. So
yeah.
So you have to deal with it.
Again, once you realize, and it's not something you decide, almost never something you decide in advance, you realize what the film is about or what the song is about or whatever the piece is about, sometimes after you started writing or after you started working on it, it sinks in and you're like, oh, the core of this thing, the engine that makes it works, the theme that holds all these pieces together is this, and for each project is different.
Mm-hmm.
But once you recognize it, then you can enhance it through revisions.
Sure, of course.
But also crystallize it by removing what doesn't belong.
Yeah, that's very sound advice for those who are trying to make their way. Yuval, we've been speaking for around 65 minutes, and we're going to wind this thing down. And I'm just curious, in all your experiences, can you share with us a story that's either quirky or weird or offbeat or oddball or just plain funny?
I have a few, yeah. But I think probably the most fitting here would be, so having done television, you know that the deadlines are not movable in any way, shape, or form.
That's
you just
right.
need to meet them. And one of those shows that needed original music that I mentioned earlier, I did the songs, but I didn't get to record guide tracks yet, and we didn't record the vocals yet.
Right.
And I had this crazy heart rate, some unexplainable reason, and it was not going away. So I decided to go to the doctor, and the doctor wanted me to run a test that I could only do at the hospital. I got to the hospital, they wouldn't let me leave with that heart rate. And they kept me there for a few days. And all the while, the deadline is coming. And what am I going to do? They need something to lip sync to. And I ended up having to sneak out of the hospital while they were changing shifts. Take a taxi, record a guide track, send it with a delivery company to the production, and then had to sneak back into the hospital without them noticing.
And you did that successfully?
Yes, the two actresses of the show lip synced to my guide track.
Yeah.
I saw an unedited version of it, and at the end of the take, they were both on the floor laughing of the experience of hearing my voice with their lips.
Well, that's a really great example of the show must go on. You
Absolutely. On the other hand, another pretty insane story. So we didn't talk about it, but one of my mother's best friends when I was a child was Leonard Bernstein.
Oh, yeah.
And every time he came to Israel, which was very often, we would spend a lot of time with him. And one day he wanted to show me that my name appears in the Bible as the first musician in the Old Testament.
Really?
Yep. I didn't know it before.
I didn't know it till you just said it.
Well, I didn't know it before he showed it to me. And we were in the hotel in Jerusalem right before it was a big concert with the Vienna Philharmonic in Jerusalem with the president in attendance and everything. But Lenny just kept looking for that part in the book. And he found it and showed it to me and everything. And then we got to the concert hall 10 minutes after the concert was supposed to start. So the audience was already seated, the orchestra was already on stage, and we just arrived.
Oh, wow.
That was a pretty crazy story, too.
That is a crazy story. And he was somebody that was dear to your mom, is that right?
Yeah, he considered himself my godfather.
Really?
We were very, very close, yeah. The last time I saw him was in my bar mitzvah.
Wow.
Yeah, he died about a year and a half later or so.
So
yeah.
Leonard Bernstein, or as people called him, Lenny B., he was at your bar mitzvah?
Yes.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
Well, he was a close friend. I mean, it is, that's how I grew up. He wasn't a celebrity for me. It was my mother's friend, and then he was my friend. He was talking to me in Hebrew.
Wow.
He had a little bit of Hebrew, being Jewish.
Yes.
And he was talking to me in Hebrew, yeah.
Well, and as you say, he spent a lot of time in Israel as well.
He would come at least once or twice a year.
Was he the head conductor of the Israeli Philharmonic for a while? Or did he just guest conduct?
No, he was guest conductor, but he was a very, very frequent guest.
He was with the New York Phil, and that was a big deal. And, of course, he was also one of the great composers of all time.
Yeah. Talk about great composers and Lenny. Another pretty insane story was I went to, when I was in New York, talking about beginning of 2006, I think it was, I think that's when it was. I went to some shows and I saw this incredible production of Sweeney Todd. It was the second preview night, and it was astonishing, absolutely astonishing. And I was so taken by it, I had to take it in. I after the show, I didn't immediately leave. I was exploring. I was looking at the set. It was the first time I saw a show where it sounded like there was no amplification, even though there was. And I was trying to figure out how they did it.
Mm-hmm.
I was finding speakers spread out, and I was just exploring the environment, and I intentionally found myself staying for notes. And
what year was this?
So,
what year?
I believe 2006, 2005 or 2000. I think 2006.
Was this,
or maybe the end of 2005?
Was this with Patti LuPone?
Patti LuPone and
Patti
yeah,
LuPone.
Yeah.
So they had the musicians on stage, right?
Well, they didn't have any musicians.
That they
the
played.
cast was the musicians.
That's it. That the cast played. That's right. I remember.
It was an incredible production, absolutely incredible. and so I stayed for notes, which was fascinating. By the way, talk about clarity. Most of the notes were about clarity.
Well, yeah, sure.
And then, thoroughly impressed, I at the end of notes, I went to the director and shook his hand and told him how amazing job he's done. And a day later, I realized it was not the director; it was Stephen Sondheim.
Oh wow, wow, holy moly!
So that's pretty funny how I met Stephen Sondheim. I didn't realize it was him.
Yeah, that's all right. And last question for today, because that's a pretty good way to end the amusing stories part of this. Do you have a solid? You've already given us tons of great advice, but do you have a single solid piece of advice or a tip that you can lend to those who are just sort of starting out in the business, or maybe they've been in the business for a little while and they're trying to get to that next level?
Yes, I do, and I am very passionate about it because I think it applies not only to new people but also to people who have been working for years.
Mm-hmm.
I discovered it about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when a good friend of mine, a lyricist that I work with a ton, Hannah Goldberg, she's one of the top lyricists in Israel, and we're working on an album, a solo album that I'm going to be recording next year. But at some point she worked, or not really worked, but she was elected to represent the artist in the company in Israel that collects royalties for creative people.
Right.
Like the Israeli, parallel to ASCAP, for
right.
example.
Sure.
And in that position, she actually had access to the worldwide database of people who are eligible for royalties.
Wow, okay.
And I asked her, Hannah, how many are we? How many are there worldwide?
Collecting?
I'm sorry?
Collecting royalties. How many are collecting?
Who are people who are eligible for royalties? That we're talking authors of novels, lyricists, music composers, screenplays, everybody who collects royalties.
Right.
Through these associations. And that includes people who died up to 7 years prior, right?
Right.
Now, the numbers I have are about 11 years old, but still. Do you have a guess?
How many are collecting?
Yeah.
I have no clue. I have no idea. It could be hundreds of thousands, and it could be 12,000. I have no idea.
Well, I'm talking about everybody who ever released a song or a book.
Millions.
So I was expecting millions, right? I think most people would expect millions.
Yeah.
A lot of it because we are surrounded by artists. That's how we live our lives.
Yeah.
But I was absolutely shocked to find that it was 1.5 million worldwide, including the dead people.
Wow, that's pretty amazing, considering how many billions of people have lived.
Yes, and so that really was a pivotal moment for me as an artist, because I realized that working just to get jobs, to make a living, is just not enough. Because what you will not do with your own identity as a creative person, nobody else will. So I would say, know who you are, what you truly love to do, what you are uniquely good at, which gives you a competitive edge, because otherwise you will not survive anyway. And you will not do anything worthwhile if it's not that.
Mm-hmm.
Avoid doing what it is not aligned with who you are. Do it as you can do it as an exercise, but frankly, choose your projects wisely, because life is short. And in the end of the day, you want to make the world better than it is, if you can, with your art. Mm-hmm. As little effect you have, you want to have a positive one. Don't pollute the world with bullshit, even if you're paid to do it.
Right.
Find ways to do something that is contributing to people's perceptions, to highlighting problems that can be solved, etc. There are ways to really focus your efforts on something that's aligned with who you are and what you believe, and expresses something that's truthful and helpful to other people. And when you're just occupied with to get jobs and to get the job done or entertain yourself or whatever, that's just not enough. It's not good enough, and that's creating a lot of pollution of really things that shouldn't be out there.
I think that's very solid advice, especially for people who are struggling and trying to find their way to be true to yourself, which is what I think all the great artists are. And if not, then you're probably just going down some road that's not going to get you very far anyway.
Yeah, every time you're occupying yourself with what you think other people want, or what's in now, you're really setting up for failure.
Yeah.
It just never works. It's something can be very successful being completely against stream if it's powerful and truthful and has genuine effect on people, and a good one. It will just catch on. There's occupying yourself with what people expect or what's in or what's popular. I mean, yeah, if you have a song and you're about to record it to an album, you probably want to sound like you belong to this decade. That is important, because otherwise it will just not be played anywhere.
That's true.
But that's production. It's creative, but it's not the core song. It's not the core of what you're doing. It's just, how it's produced. It's same for film, same for theater. You want to do something that fits in people's lives, that they can connect to. But otherwise, you're not doing art for yourself. People who say that they're doing it for themselves are probably mostly lying to themselves, because they will not be happy if nobody will be interested.
Oh, you got to have that. Got to have the audience. The audience is part of the process.
So what I'm saying is, the experience you create for the audience is the art. That's what it is. You're opening their eyes to something. You're making them connect to something they weren't looking at. Whatever it is, you are interacting with the audience. You're creating an interaction that's meaningful, hopefully, to them as well. Mm-hmm. That's the essence of it. Without it, art is a futile exercise. Well, does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. So, Yuval, I think that this is... you've just given us so much great food for thought throughout this whole interview, but in particular, your wise words here at the end. And I can't thank you enough for spending some time with me today on StoryBeat, and I'm grateful that you came on the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great episodes to you. This podcast would not have been possible without the generous support of the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.